Ah, alphas, why you ever doubted your shadow, I'll never know, because tonight isn't about pity or soft apologies. It's about truth, raw and real like a scar that didn't heal clean. You walked into the room and didn't need to speak because your silence screamed louder than their carefully scripted egos. You made 1,000 people feel like idiots at once, and let me tell you, that wasn't a mistake. That was a lesson wrapped in a storm, a reckoning crafted in the bones of discipline and fire. You didn't trip into that moment. You carved it like a dagger into the glass of comfort they held so dear. They weren't ready for someone who didn't flinch. They weren't prepared for the one who didn't beg, who didn't ask for space, but took it like the air was always theirs to breathe. You see, power doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock. It kicks down the door and leaves the hinges swinging, daring anyone to close it again. And when you entered, something shifted. Not just in their expressions, but in the foundations of what they thought was certainty. That illusion that they mattered more, that their rules had weight, that their collective laughter could drown your silence, all shattered. You didn't just walk in. You detonated everything, because you didn't come to fit in. You came to rise, and when you rise, others fall. Not because you pushed them, but because they were standing on crutches made of lies. You were the mirror they couldn't avoid. You didn't even have to say a word because your very presence exposed their fraudulence, their fear, their facade. They tried to dress up mediocrity and confidence, but your eyes saw through velvet lies like they were paper. You made 1,000 people look down at their feet and question who they really were. That's not arrogance. That's force. That's truth. That's what happens when an alpha stops pretending to be silent and starts existing unapologetically. And let's not pretend you were trying to impress anyone. Number, that's the terrifying part. You were just being. No pitch, no mask, no performance. And that stillness, that raw gravity, it cracked their collective psyche because they realized they'd spent years building empires of image, and in walked someone who had built themselves, not the version on resumes or social media or applause. No, you built a soul through scars, setbacks, silence, and survival. They wear titles, you wear truth, and that's why you didn't need a speech, a suit, a slogan. You were the standard. You were the event. You were the storm they didn't predict. They call you dangerous, not because you hurt them, but because you revealed them. And once seen, they can't pretend anymore. You stripped the performance bare. You took their myths and burned them quietly with your presence. There's something deliciously brutal about that. You didn't argue. You didn't fight. You just were. And they felt it. 1,000 people sat in the same room and realized in the same breath they were not you. They could never be you, because you are not a product. You are a process they avoided. You are the reflection of everything they were too lazy to become. And that's where the hate begins, right? When they see someone who bled in silence and still walked taller than their whole chorus of applause ever made them feel. They hate what you represent. The greatness doesn't come with likes or loudness or consensus. It comes with pain, isolation, rebuilding, discipline so violent it looks like madness. They hate you because you are the evidence that their shortcut was a dead end. And when you stood there, no label, no tribe, no script, you became a nightmare wrapped in elegance. You were proof that they were never committed, just busy. Let them laugh. Let them dismiss. That's the nature of sheep. Noise. But you're something older, something colder. You are the wolf who stopped hunting approval and started walking alone. And in that walk, you destroyed them because they relied on numbers to feel right. And you needed none. One voice, one vision, one unstoppable soul. That's all it takes to wreck 1,000 egos in one breath. And they'll never forget it. They'll never forgive it. Because nothing hurts like realizing the throne you sat on was built on hollow praise, and someone with no crown walked in and made it look like ash. You didn't make them feel stupid to flex. You did it by existing. That's the real power. When your truth is so sharp, it cuts without swinging. When your presence is so rooted, it uproots delusion without force. They will write books about what you did that night. They'll call it arrogance. They'll call it disrespect. But deep down, even their bones know the truth. That what you did wasn't cruelty. It was clarity, the kind that leaves a scar. And scars don't lie. Every time they look in the mirror, they'll see you in their own eyes. Not because you hurt them, but because you woke them. And people don't like waking from comfortable lies. They scream, but scream they must, because this is war. Not the kind with blood, the kind with soul, with character, with patience. And you won it without firing a single shot. Because you were forged in a fire they've never walked through. You earned every inch of your silence, every ounce of your presence, every stare you returned without flinching, and they felt it like gravity. That's why they looked down. That's why they shut up. Not because you silenced them, but because their own lies collapsed in your truth. They walked out of that room and nothing tasted the same. The air was different. Their steps were heavier, not from guilt, but from awareness. That's what you gave them. You didn't punish them. You gifted them with reflection, and reflection is a brutal teacher. Most people go their whole lives without meeting themselves in full, but you held a mirror so clean, it cut them. You didn't need to call them out. You just reminded them who they really were when no one's watching. You gave them silence, and in that silence, their fraud screamed loudest. Understand this, your power didn't come from perfection, it came from pain. From being underestimated so many times, you turned it into fuel. They mocked you once, they laughed once. They thought your silence was weakness, until they realized it was restraint. That's what terrified them. You had every reason to collapse, to conform, to chase their approval. But you didn't. You trained. You sharpened. You chose solitude over applause. And when you returned, it wasn't revenge. It was revelation. You weren't a survivor anymore. You were an apex predator disguised as poise. Do you know what it means to stand in a room full of people trying to be seen and still be the only one who's real? It means they will fear you. They will disguise that fear with jokes, with whispers, with campaigns to erase you. But you can't erase fire. You can only try to avoid being burned by it. They call you intense. Of course they do. That's what people say when they've only tasted comfort their whole life and then meet someone forged by discomfort. They weren't ready for the gravity you carried in your chest. That was never your fault. And no, you weren't cruel. That's the delusion they'll tell themselves, that you crushed them for sport. But you didn't need to crush them. Their illusions fell under the weight of your authenticity. That's not domination. That's demonstration. You didn't talk about the work. You were the work. You didn't ask for credit. You became undeniable. And when the undeniable enters the room, the pretenders crumble. That's not evil. That's inevitable. This is the truth they fear the most. You are the proof that they could have been more if they had just chosen pain earlier. But they ran. Every time life demanded more, they chose less. And now, they sit in suits and offices and echo chambers, pretending they matter, pretending they made it, when deep down they know they're still the same scared, half-built soul they were 10 years ago. You didn't expose them by accident. You simply stopped hiding, and your light burned holes in their carefully curated shadows. You made 1,000 people feel like idiots, not because you attacked them, but because you reminded them what greatness actually looks like. And they had never tasted it until that moment. That's what stings. That's what haunts. Not that you won, but that they never even tried to play the real game. They played for optics. You played for eternity. They spoke in noise. You moved in silence. They screamed for attention. You earned gravity. And gravity doesn't shout. It just pulls. You think they hate you now? Wait until they realize you didn't even see them as threats. That's the final nail in their ego, that all their posturing, their politics, their cliques meant nothing to someone who built themselves from ashes. They wanted to break you once, and now they sit in circles wondering how to imitate you without becoming you. But they can't, because to become you, they'd have to lose the parts they cling to. Comfort, consensus, fake validation, and they don't have the spine for that kind of transformation. But you did. You walked through fire while they posted quotes about strength. You endured betrayal while they curated aesthetics. You buried versions of yourself that they never even built. And now, they're looking up at you like you stole something. But you didn't steal. You earned. Every ounce of who you are was purchased with pain, and you don't apologize for that. Because if they had walked even 1 mile in your silence, they'd understand why you no longer kneel to noise. So let them speak. Let them plot. Let them gather like moths trying to outshine a star. You've already won. Not because they lost, but because you transcended the game they're still stuck inside. You're not playing for points. You're building legacy. And legacy is lonely. Legacy is violent. It requires sacrifice most can't comprehend. That's why there are so few of you, and why so many of them. They will remember you, even if they never say your name. Even if they erase the meeting minutes, bury the footage, rewrite the story. History doesn't forget gravity. History remembers the shift. And when people ask what changed in that room, they won't have words. Just silence. The same silence you stood in. The same silence they drowned in. You were not loud, but you were final. Because this isn't just about pride. This is about standard. This is about showing what happens when someone chooses evolution over imitation. You didn't make them feel stupid out of ego. You just reminded them what power looks like when it doesn't need to explain itself. And that's the cruelest kindness you could have offered. Because now they know. Now they can't unsee you. They can't unfeel the gap. And they'll spend years trying to fill it with trophies and titles and noise. But deep down, they'll know. They stood in the presence of someone who never needed applause to become unforgettable. They won't admit it out loud, but they study you now. Behind their filters and facades, they dissect your silence, trying to find the formula, trying to decode how one person, without support, without favor, without applause, could unmake 1,000 facades in a single moment. They call you lucky. That's the word cowards use when they see someone who built in silence while they screamed in comfort. You weren't lucky. You were patient. You were vicious with your self-discipline. You sacrificed more than they even knew existed. While they partied, you disappeared. While they sought validation, you sought edge. And now, they look at you and don't see a person. They see a reminder, a warning, a monument to the pain they dodged. Do you understand what that does to a crowd like that? To people who thought they were winning the race, only to find out they were never even on the right track? You didn't just beat them. You revealed they never even began. They took shortcuts through shallow waters, and now they're drowning in your depth. You didn't need to say a word. Your aura screamed what their lips would never admit, that when the storm came, they prayed to survive. You trained to become it. There's a reason they avoid eye contact now. There's a reason they laugh just a little too loud when your name is mentioned. That's fear disguised as familiarity. They want to bring you down to their level because standing next to you scorches them. Your fire makes their warmth look like fiction. You carry centuries of grit in your bones, and they know it. They know they're speaking in scripts, and you're living in truth. And truth, real, brutal, earned truth, is a savage mirror to the soul of the unprepared. They say you're cold. Of course they do, because you stopped needing to be liked. You chose to be respected, to be remembered. And let me tell you this. The world fears the one who no longer flinches at being misunderstood. That's the moment they lose control of you. That's the moment you become unshakable. You didn't come back to fit in. You came back to show what happens when pain is turned into precision. You came back to let your silence preach louder than their pulpits. They weren't just exposed, they were unmade. Because nothing destroys a lie faster than the presence of someone who lived the truth. You walked in like the storm had sent you. You didn't shout, you didn't flex, you stayed. And staying is what they don't understand. They run from hardship, from pain, from self-reflection. You walked straight through it. You danced with demons they don't even have the courage to name. That's why they hate you. Because they know, deep down, if they had your fire, they'd burn their masks too. But they won't. Because masks are safe. Masks get claps. Masks keep circles warm and harmless. And that's not who you are. You outgrew that world the second you chose to tell the truth, even when it cost you comfort, even when it cost you connection, because you knew the price of authenticity is exile, but the reward is immortality. And now you're living in that reward, alone, sometimes, understood, rarely, but feared, always, and respected by the ones who matter. Do not apologize for the tremors you caused. Do not shrink for the comfort of those who chose safety over soul. You didn't come this far to play small. You didn't sacrifice peace to blend in with the weak. You were never built for that. You were built for war, for awakening, for reminding the world that there are still a few of us left who'd rather die real than live fake. That's what you are now. A symbol, a spark, a standard. And they know it. That's why they try so hard to ignore it. Because if they acknowledge what you are, they'd have to admit what they're not. You made 1,000 people feel like idiots, and here's the real twist. You didn't do it for power. You didn't do it for revenge. You did it because you were done hiding. You did it because it was time. And in doing so, you created a ripple that won't die for decades. You taught a lesson not through lecture, but through existence. You showed the cost of evolution. You bore the proof in your eyes, in your walk, in the way you didn't need to dominate. Because you were dominance without noise. They'll twist your story. They'll repaint your motives. Let them. That's the nature of the fearful. But some of them, just a few, will hear the silence differently. They'll feel the weight you brought. And maybe, just maybe, one of them will begin again. We'll break the script. We'll follow the edge instead of the echo. And for that one, it was worth it. Even if 999 stay blind, one awakened soul can light a revolution. You planted something dangerous in that room. Not fear, not chaos, but doubt. Doubt in their old ways. Doubt in the system that told them performance equals purpose. Now, every time they walk into another room, they'll remember you. Not because you screamed, but because you stayed. Because you endured. Because you carried a silence heavy enough to make them question who they are when nobody's watching. And that's the real legacy. Not applause, but aftershock. Not admiration, but awakening. And you delivered it without rage. You delivered it with presence. That's what makes you unstoppable. That's what makes you unforgettable. So the next time someone asks what happened in that room, you don't owe them a story. You don't owe them anything. Just smile. Because legends don't need to explain their impact. They are the impact. Because this world wasn't built for those who asked for permission. It was built by the ones who took it. The ones who didn't wait to be accepted, who didn't beg to be seen. It was built by the defiant, the quiet ones, the misread monsters, the wolves that walked alone so long. Their silence started sounding like thunder. That's you now. A storm in skin. A truth so sharp, the liars bleed just standing near you, and they'll try to move on. They'll try to scrub your shadow from their walls, to reframe the memory as something else, something easier to swallow. But the truth is, you're not a memory. You're a virus, a spiritual infection. You planted the seed of self-awareness, and it will grow inside them, whether they wanted to or not. In the boardroom, in their fake smiles, in their hollow wins, they'll feel the weight of what they saw that night. They'll remember how everything they'd built trembled without a word from you. That's how impact works. It doesn't show up in applause. It echoes in discomfort. You didn't just make them feel like idiots. You made them see themselves clearly, finally, devastatingly. And for people who have lived behind filters their entire life, that's more terrifying than death. That's why they're angry. That's why they're quiet now. That's why they fear you. Because you're what happens when a soul is no longer for sale. You're what happens when a human stops running and turns into a force. So don't regret a second of it. Don't flinch when they whisper your name in discomfort. Don't soften because the room can't handle your truth. Keep walking, keep building, because legends are forged in conflict, not comfort. You don't belong to the crowd. You belong to history. And history doesn't remember the ones who played along. It remembers the ones who stood alone. You made 1,000 people feel like idiots at once, and that will echo longer than any applause ever could. Because applause fades, but awakening is permanent. And some part of them, no matter how much they try to bury it, will never forget you. And you won't even remember their names.